Remember in 2023 when we, the voters, decided to legalize marijuana in Ohio? Well, now the state legislature is trying to screw things up. I'll tell you what they're doing in just a minute on this episode of The Scott Sands Show.
It's a Scott Sands Show.
Hey, thank you so much for finding the podcast version of the show. It's episode 2535. And find us on YouTube, Facebook, X, soon to be on all the other platforms as well. And I appreciate you finding the show. Gary Daniels from the ACLU of Ohio will join me. We'll talk about SB 56, which is before the state Senate now and could dramatically change what we, the voters, decided in 2023 to legalize marijuana in the state of Ohio. I want to thank some of the sponsors, longtime partners of the Scott Sands Show, like 4guysandaroof.com, Farnsworth Cocktail Bar and Waterville, RixaHealth.com. I'm down just over 100 pounds now on RixaHealth.com. GLP-1s are really working. And a new sponsor of the show, I mentioned them the other day. Where's the camera? ALP. If you use nicotine pouches like the one that starts with a Z, check out ALP. It's a better time. And in fact, if you look for the link on the Facebook page or on my X, you'll see a discount code to buy ALP for 10% off on your first purchase. So thanks to Tucker Carlson's company, ALP, for partnering with the Scott Sands Show. I feel like this story should probably be getting more attention than it has. I've shared this story a few times on my X feed. There is an asteroid heading our way in the next 10 years, 7 years. Yeah, 7 years. And it could wipe out an entire U.S. city. By the way, my producer and cat Tiger may be making his way into the camera frame now. It's dinner time. I'm recording the podcast episode a little bit later than I normally do, and Tiger starts to want his wet canned food like around 5 o'clock every afternoon. So he may be in the shot. I'm not sure. He's certainly walking all over the keyboard now. So there's an asteroid that, yes, Tiger, I'm recording now. Thank you. I never had this problem in the iHeartRadio studios. here's why this is jump down if you want. Jump down if you want. Down. I'm sure he'll be back and wanting up here in a second. I was telling you about this asteroid heading our way in 2032. And the reason why I've shared the story so many times is because NASA keeps increasing the odds that it could actually hit Earth. We have been hit by asteroids and comets in the past. We're hit by meteors all the time, but they're not that destructive. This one could be. It's asteroid 2024 YR4. And the likelihood that it could actually hit the Earth in 2032 has been increased just since last week from 1.2% to 2.3% to 2.6%. And now NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies says the odds that it could hit the Earth are now 3.1%. That's about a 1 in 32 chance of actually hitting the Earth. The asteroid, it's not a huge asteroid. It's about 177 feet around. It's about as wide as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So it's not an extinction level event, if you remember the movie Deep Impact or Armageddon with Bruce Willis. But it could wipe out a major city. It could release 8 megatons of energy on impact, which is 500 times the energy of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Japan in World War II. So this is a major event. And NASA keeps creeping up the odds that it could hit us, and nobody is talking about this. Do I think it's going to hit us? I don't know. We've got 7 years to figure out what to do if the odds continue to increase. But these things happen. The Earth's history has been shaped by asteroids and comets hitting the Earth hundreds of times in the past. The extinction of the dinosaurs is the most common example used. So this is, I think, something that we should be worried about, but it shouldn't keep you up at night. You shouldn't lose sleep over this yet. But it seems like more people should be talking about that story. So I wanted to lead off today's episode of the podcast, making sure you were aware of this asteroid heading our way in 7 years and to keep an eye on NASA's odds that it could actually hit us. The other story I wanted to touch on briefly before we get to our guest is Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York. She's been on my show several times, a friend of the show. She is introducing legislation before Congress to change Flag Day. June 14th, it's Flag Day. It's not an official federal holiday. It's just an observance. But Tenney says that the holiday should be renamed Trump's birthday and Flag Day to recognize Donald Trump as, quote, the founder of America's golden age. In an X post, if you follow her at Rep Tenney, she posted, just as George Washington's birthday is codified as a federal holiday, President Trump's birthday should also be celebrated to recognize him as the founder of America's golden age. That's why I introduced legislation to make President Trump's birthday a federal holiday. I don't think this has a chance to pass, but I could be wrong. Should we observe President Trump's birthday and Flag Day as a federal holiday? Many of you find it appropriate that President Donald Trump was born on Flag Day. We've seen him embrace the flag many times on stage. I'm not sure. Maybe you disagree. I see many posters on X who think that Donald Trump belongs on Mount Rushmore as well. But I wanted to make sure you were aware of this. You can chime in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not we should observe Donald Trump's birthday as a federal holiday. Hopefully you were able to enjoy a long weekend for President's Day this week, although certainly too cold to get out and really do anything. And the freezing temperatures will continue for another day or two, according to Chris Vickers and our friends at WTOL. My guest today is with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio. And he testified earlier today before the Ohio State Senate about SB 56. We legalized marijuana a couple of years ago. And ever since then, because it was not an amendment to the state's constitution, state legislators have been able to tinker with it just a bit here and there, much to the chagrin of civil liberties advocates like Gary. And there are aspects to this that I strongly disagree with as well. And we'll get into all of those things. We're not going to talk about necessarily the effects of THC and using cannabis as much as we will the issues associated with the freedom of choice involved with issue 2 and now SB 56. Gary Daniels from the American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio. You can find him on X, G Daniels Ohio. Joining me now on the Scott Sands Show. Gary, it's great to have you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Appreciate being here.
You were in the State House today testifying about SB 56.
Yes, SB 56 is, I'm sure your listeners will remember, it wasn't too terribly long ago. Ohio legalized adult use cannabis via what was known as Issue 2. The legislators, a lot of them didn't like it before it was Issue 2. They didn't like it while it was Issue 2, and they certainly don't like it post Issue 2. So they've been working on rolling it back ever since it passed. There was a little bit of dysfunction at the State House last session. It didn't allow them to get around to it in time, but it seems like this particular session, which just started in January, they are moving very quickly to make a variety of changes to what we know as Issue 2.
First of all, dysfunction in the Ohio State House. I'm shocked.
Yes.
So back in November of 2023, Issue 2 did pass pretty overwhelmingly. It allows everyone over 21 to smoke, vape, ingest weed. You can grow up to 12 plants, I believe, a bunch of other rules, which are different from some other states which have legalized marijuana. But you're right. Republicans have been opposed to this from the very beginning, despite the will of the voters, and have been looking for opportunities to claw back Issue 2, to claw back the legalization of marijuana in Ohio. And that starts with with Governor DeWine, Attorney General Yost, and many others in the State House. SB 56 makes the restrictions even more cumbersome for recreational users and will drive the price up even more. Explain what SB 56 does.
Yes, it's with the caveat that not every issue in SB 56 is a civil liberties issue or a civil rights issue of the type that the ACLU of Ohio is interested in. A lot of it is administrative tinkering, having to do with the industry and how the actual mechanics of legal cannabis will continue to operate in Ohio. But among the things that we are interested in, and I think your listeners would or might be interested in. So issue 2 did approve home grow for 6 plants up to 12 in a household. You know, let's say you have some roommates or a spouse or someone, it would allow up to 12 plants. Well, SB 56 rolls that back, says six plants in a household, period. That's it. It also introduces some pretty draconian laws in Ohio with regard to enforcement. So that both drivers and passengers will be forbidden from consuming cannabis, whether it's vaping, whether it's smoking, what have you, while in a car. And it's certainly not to suggest that the ACLU of Ohio or anybody endorses people driving impaired, by no means. But the way that the bill is written, no evidence of impairment is needed. It's just using those products, again, whether you're driver or passenger in a car. And it also introduces something we had hoped had gone by the wayside for the most part, mandatory minimums. So on even a first offense for this, you would have to spend a mandatory 3 days in jail. And because it would be a misdemeanor offense, it could be up to 6 months in jail, depending on who you might get as a judge. And that will escalate with repeated violations of the law. And don't want to get too much into the weeds with this, but being able at this point to effectively test for impairment because of cannabis, they're getting to it. States have figured out, in some respect, how to do this in a way that's not treated the same way as alcohol, a much different substance, as far as impairment and finding it. How much of it impairs you and to what level. But Ohio still uses the old way right now, where you're testing it much like you would alcohol with a roadside test or an OVI test. Issue 2 also created a social equity and jobs program that a lot of other states have when they passed legal marijuana. And the whole idea of that is, look, a lot of us recognize the war on drugs was a complete failure. It didn't do any of the things that it was supposed to do or protect people. It just made criminals out of people and made it harder for them to reestablish themselves in society. So these social equity and jobs programs of the type we have in Ohio, or at least are supposed to have in Ohio, the idea is that it would help people who have been directly impacted by the war on drugs and the war on cannabis to be able to get a seat at the table, to become entrepreneurs in this new industry. So you got the short end of the stick when it was illegal. We're going to allow you, a little bit of entree into the market and to become entrepreneurs in this way. No, not as far as SB 56 is concerned. We're going to scrap all of it. And not just the social equity and jobs program. There was other funding explicitly designated for addiction services and for municipalities to do certain things. They're scrapping all of that right now. They did add expungement and record sealing with a new version of the bill that was introduced and accepted today. But that's kind of the bare minimum. Again, if you've been subject to these laws before, I mean, you should not only get expungement and sealing. In our view, it should be automatic. This wouldn't be automatic. The people who have the criminal records as a result would have to go through the standard or close to the standard process in this respect. That's just gifting is out. The idea that you can, just give someone cannabis, whether it's the way that the bill is written is very vague. It's undefined. So is this 2 people or more, sharing a joint at a Super Bowl party? Is it somebody saying, oh, you got a birthday coming up or it's Christmas or what have you? You know what? Here's a little bit of marijuana, get you through the holiday season kind of thing. Nope. All that's off the table with SB 56. I don't expect that will change, but maybe it will. This is an issue that we have found at the ACLU of Ohio gets a lot of people worked up around Ohio. We have no problem with others activating people to contact their legislators and letting them know exactly how we feel. So we still have time to beat back SB 56 here, but it's the problem is it's reefer madness over at the Ohio State House right now.
There are so many problems with these restrictions, and I know you're coming at this from a civil liberties point of view. I'm coming at this from a personal choice, a freedom perspective, and an economic perspective as well. But first of all, I'm amazed that you can't pass a doob around if you're having a party. You can't pass the Dutchie to the left hand side. You can't. I mean, look. I don't smoke weed. I mean, I have, but I'm not a pothead. I got to tell you, there have been some cannabis products that have truly helped me. Before I dropped 100 pounds on the Rixa Health program, I had a lot of back pain, and I went to a bud tender in Michigan who gave me some gummies that were a mix of THC and CBD, and I would take one at night. I would never try to take one and then try to go to work the next day, but it was great for lower back pain. I mean, there are certainly some additional uses as well, and recreational. But as you're outlining what SB 56 does, I mean, it's ridiculous. The passenger, if the passenger is high and you're driving them home, you could both go to jail. That would be like picking up a drunk friend at the bar and getting pulled over for not using a turn signal or running a red light, and the sober driver and the drunk you're taking home safely both have to go to jail. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, this is being regulated by people, I think, that just don't fundamentally know much about cannabis and marijuana use.
Really?
I mean,
The government making laws about something they don't understand. Again, I'm shocked.
yeah, I mean, it could be as easy as, well, you're at a party or at a bar or somebody, and everybody goes to a van. They smoke some marijuana there, kind of thing. Not saying again that people should be running around doing that, out in public, kind of thing, because we know that there's still a stigma attached to all of this. But I think it's important to note when you're talking about the vehicle and the driver and the passenger and everything, what they have right now, it doesn't mean you're driving. You're just in the vehicle. Heck, it's, right now in Columbus, it's 10 degrees. Some people who might say, oh, I'm going to step outside of a bar real quick and see if I can, sneak a smoke in, might say, hey, you know what? My car is parked over in the lot there. Why don't we go over there, kind of thing. It's just, again, it's written in a way that just, you can tell they just fundamentally don't get it. And they have no interest really, it seems, in really regulating it, as alcohol is. If I overheard people from the industries testimony today, for instance, current law is no dispensaries within a half mile of each other. SB 56 would make it so no dispensaries within a mile of each other. And we don't do that with, beer sales. We don't do it with liquor sales. It's just, I can walk not far outside of my house and down the street and get, all kinds of alcohol at all times of day or night. But in this case, they're saying, essentially, we could look at this as like a full employment bill for Michigan and surrounding states, because I think that's what people, practically speaking, will continue to do, as I think many have in Ohio.
Yeah, in Northwest Ohio. I mean, you go one exit up on 75 and you got 7 or 8 dispensaries at that first exit. They know what's going on. And that's for a lot of economic reasons too. And I know we're talking to Gary Daniels from the Ohio ACLU. You're coming at this from a civil liberties point of view. But from a purely economic standpoint, all of these restrictions that Ohio has placed on this, the marijuana in Ohio, I'm told, is twice as expensive here as it is just across the state line in Michigan. I believe you can get an ounce of pot in Michigan for about $75, $85. And in Ohio, that same ounce of weed will cost you about $180, $190. So what these laws, what these restrictions and regulations have done is continue to fuel the marketplace, at least in part of the state, to other states like Michigan. And in states that don't have easy access to Michigan dispensaries, it's continuing to fuel the black market and allow drug cartels and gangs to thrive. And if you're buying the weed off the street, you don't know what it's laced with. It could very easily today be laced with everything from cocaine to fentanyl, which makes it much more dangerous.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's all good points, and it's again, I think it's just going to drive people elsewhere. Whether it's from their friends or their buddies or whatever that they got marijuana from before issue two, drive up to Michigan, go somewhere else. The anticipation is usually in states that make cannabis legal. It starts off kind of expensive, and then the prices drop over time as things get ironed out and the demand grows, and the whole
More
operation
dispensaries,
essentially gets up and
more
running.
cultivation,
Yeah, but
which they want to do. They want to restrict that too. I believe I saw a number, and I can't find it offhand. That said something like I think that the law would allow only 350, 375 dispensaries statewide. We have 250 municipalities in the city, which means again, some cities are going to be underserved, some townships and other villages are going to be underserved, which also drives the black market even more.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. They don't seem to have any real interest in, let's let the marketplace decide. On the other hand, to be fair, we shouldn't pretend one way or the other, good or bad, that SB 56 will be the end of this debate and the end of
Right.
legislative tinkering. They can come back at any time to do this. This was, so people know, there's two essential ways for Ohioans to change the law. Take it into their own hands and change law here in Ohio. You can do a ballot initiative. We are changing the state constitution, and that's a rather inflexible way to go about things because the only way you can change the constitution is through another ballot initiative or a
Right.
constitutional convention, which just doesn't happen in modern times, it
And
seems.
and let's be honest, the first time we tried to legalize marijuana in Ohio, the state constitutional amendment was a pretty bad amendment.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people didn't like that. Certainly, they didn't like a lot of the provisions within it. But this particular effort was done via what's called an initiated statute. You're trying to change the law, and legislators can tinker with the law anytime they want, even no matter what Ohioans had passed. And the real rub with this is as part of the initiated statute process, you essentially, as the campaign, and ACLU of Ohio wasn't part of the campaign. We endorsed it, but we weren't part of the movers and shakers behind it. But as part of the initiated statute process, you essentially present it to the legislature and they have 4 months to act on it or not. They can choose to work with the campaign. They can change some things. They can scrap everything, and then the campaign can just go to the ballot at that point, or they can choose to do nothing about it. The campaign decides how they want to proceed from there. Legislators didn't touch it during the initiated statute process. There were no bills, there were no hearings, there were nothing to add any kind of opinion or workings or changes via the legislature reflecting their opinions. They just let it go and ignored it. So now on the back end, after it's been legal for a little while now here in Ohio, now they want to make a bunch of changes, and taxes are among them. I mean, we've seen them wanting, Democrats and Republicans. We've seen them
Oh,
wanting to use the tax money. They want to increase it. They want to use it for law enforcement. They want to use it for jails. They want to retrain police dogs. They want to, just like with a lot of, so-called sin taxes. I think, you can have me back on 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And I think just like with alcohol and cigarettes, we'll be talking about all the various things that legal cannabis in Ohio are funding because of politicians.
well, and you're right. It's a money grab. They see the revenue that taxing marijuana, legal marijuana sales could bring into the state, and rather than allowing that money to go where the voters said it should go, they
Mhm.
want to grab it for their own personal pet projects. Under issue two, there were five funds created in the state treasury: the Adult Use Tax Fund, the Cannabis Social Equity and Jobs Fund, the Host Community Cannabis Fund, Substance Abuse and Addiction Fund, and the Division of Cannabis Control and Tax Commissioner Fund.
Mm.
Now, with this increase in tax rates, by the way, which drives up the price and fuels the black market again from 10% to 15%, or as Governor DeWine wants, as high as 20%, it's all going to go into the state general revenue fund, which means lawmakers can choose where that money is spent and not necessarily where the voters said it should be spent. And I know that's not an ACLU issue, but it's a big problem I've got with these changes in SB 56.
Yeah, no, it's some of this. It certainly is an ACLU issue, in that we're big supporters of the social equity and jobs program, and like you said, Ohioans voted on this, and so if some of the money is devoted to non-ACLU type issues, addiction services, giving the municipalities some money and everything. Well, I mean that's what the voters approved, but and you can take it, you could say, well, ideally, even though they're scrapping this and putting it all in the general revenue fund, which is a fancy way of saying the big pot of money that Ohio spends on everything. You could say, well, it's really just a distinction without a difference. We can still fund all of these things. We have just, erased it formally from the law, but don't worry about it. We can still spend money on this stuff. But, I don't think that this is something where Ohioans should trust politicians to do the right thing here. There's a reason why they're making these changes, and it's not because they're just kind of tidying up language and making things more efficient. It's because they fundamentally don't believe in this, and they don't essentially care what Ohioans passed. They see it now as their opportunity to do what they want with all of this.
Yeah, it's not often that I find myself at complete odds with the Republican leadership and the conservative movement, but this is one where I think it's worth standing up and saying, no, you're getting this all wrong. And I don't know how much of the booze lobby is coming into play. Obviously, an increase in marijuana sales probably affects liquor sales in the state. But the entire approach that the Republican leadership in the House and state Senate have taken has been completely wrong on how to look at this. And I realize there are long term dangers and risks associated with legalizing drugs that we're not aware of today, and I fully acknowledge that. But it's been less than a year and a half. We don't know what those implications are yet. Let's play this out. I mean, there were certainly implications with the prohibition of alcohol and the relegalization of alcohol, and we've learned how to live within those issues. This, I think, is not when people get drunk at a bar, they start fights. You're not going to see a bunch of people at a Super Bowl party smoking a joint, going out on the lawn and starting a fight. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but generally speaking, it's a less deadly addictive drug, in my opinion, and I'm certainly no doctor than say alcohol abuse.
Yeah, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people around the state, whether it's at events or at the state house or what have you. Oftentimes, if I'm on the same panel or same event as police officers, or I run into them at the state house, I'm asking them questions, just to enhance my own knowledge of stuff. And I have asked them over the years, as you mentioned, there have been other attempts to legalize cannabis in Ohio, and I've asked them sort of the questions that you are, or you're inquiring about. How do you feel about this, as a law enforcement officer? And to a person, and they say it in testimony as well, because former law enforcement have shown up to testify on this bill and said, look, our problem is not with weed smokers. We got problems with drinkers, the people that over imbibe. We got problem with people on opiates, overdosing in their car and what have you. But we don't have these problems with people smoking weed. And Ohio, actually, a lot of people didn't know this pre-issue two. They still don't know it post-issue two. But back in the 1970s, we decriminalized marijuana at modest amounts, let's say, so that there was a minor misdemeanor. Nobody's going to jail. Now, under Ohio's home rule system of government, you did have some cities that made it misdemeanors. And so there were stories around Ohio for decades about, you don't want to go before this judge in this particular city or county. They're going to sentence you to 10 days or 30 days. But that was more of an outlier. But we, up to an ounce of marijuana in Ohio under state law, that was a minor misdemeanor, no chance of going to jail. And we lived that way for decades in Ohio, and the sky didn't fall. The big problem, as far as a lot of people were concerned, is it wasn't being taxed. So you had
Right.
people engaging in this behavior, lots of people engaging in this behavior, consumption of cannabis, but the state of Ohio was making zero money off of any of it. And as you mentioned before, you were also talking about a largely unregulated product. So there were, multiple problems with the way we did it. And so full legalization just seemed, or at least partial legalization, because you still can't legally have large amounts of cannabis. This is in line, or should be, with what's going on in other states. But we just keep picking apart at it, and we just keep, reducing the benefits of issue two. And, your points are well taken on such issues as as we've been discussing here, about big government, about letting the market aside, about letting people alone if they're otherwise not hurting anybody. Some of those are core civil liberties issues as well, and we have agreement with your audience and other people that fundamentally, if you're not bothering anybody, it's nobody's business what you're doing. And that goes the same for cannabis consumption. But that is not the kind of thinking that's permeating the State House or Senate Bill 56.
For far too long, I think politicians have had the misguided belief that they can tax their citizens into the behavior they desire, and by raising the taxes on legalized marijuana, you're not going to keep people from smoking weed if they want to smoke weed. They're just going to drive to Michigan, or they're going to buy it off the street where it's really unregulated. And I could get into a whole conversation about how much THC content is in the weed today compared to the 60s and 70s. And I'm not a weed smoker, so I don't understand all that. But we're talking about the actual freedoms, the rights that we have, and the decision, the message that we sent to Columbus in November of 2023 that we wanted to legalize marijuana. I've only got a couple of more minutes with you. Gary Daniels from the Ohio ACLU here on the Scott Sand Show. Find him on X, G Daniels Ohio. Talk to me about criminal justice reform, the expungement issues, because certainly I don't know the number of inmates we may have across the state that are in jail for weed related offenses, but certainly if you got caught holding a bag of weed 5 years ago, that shouldn't be on your record anymore. It shouldn't keep you from getting a job. It should be taken off your record. And likewise, I think that there are certain groups and certain people who should be given some preferential consideration as they start a grow site or a dispensary in the state.
Yeah, luckily here in Ohio, because again, we decriminalized decent amounts of cannabis decades ago. What we didn't have is jails and prisons bursting with people like some other states because of marijuana offenses. What we do have, though, is people that get cited or ticketed or stopped or what have you. They get a criminal record, and sometimes that can be even worse when you ask people in that situation, because jail, you're in and out. I mean, you still have that criminal record, but it's that criminal record that really becomes sort of the most important factor, whether you've been to jail or not. The idea that you're going to be denied certain jobs, certain professional licenses, this can come up in issues such as custody battles. It's just which is another protection removed in SB 56, is that there were protections in issue 2 based solely on your cannabis use, that you had protections from, professional licensing, tinkering with that and what have you. And SB 56 eviscerates all of that. So
your Second Amendment rights. So owning a gun you could be blocked from owning a firearm if you've got a marijuana offense, or if you use marijuana.
Yeah, I know that I don't know where I'll confess I don't know where exactly cannabis fits into all of that. I do know for like felony drug offenses, which some cannabis offenders, that's what happens. But yeah, you're automatically
a felony is a whole other story.
Yeah.
If you're a felon, if you're drug trafficking, you should be off the streets, and that should be on your record. But I question some companies that may still be testing for marijuana use, or look and see a misdemeanor marijuana possession charge on your criminal history as part of a background check, and don't hire you because of that. I think that's wrong in today's world.
Yeah, that's that's something we've been trying to change. ACLU of Ohio and others here in Ohio in the legislature and around the country. Quite frankly, there's been some success around the country, but there's always a stigma, it seems, for any substance. I mean, here in Ohio, you can legally be fired for nicotine use from your job. So you can see sort of the uphill battle we all have here in changing the laws, or at least what the laws allow for that private industry is doing. But this one is truly a nonpartisan issue, and this is one I think that also activates a lot of people that aren't politically or socially active on a whole lot of other issues. But this one hits home for them. It's part of their daily life. It's part of their friends and family. They might have seen people get arrested, go to jail, get a criminal record. This has a widespread impact across a lot of Ohio, and so we have seen firsthand at the ACLU of Ohio. We try to get people interested in all kinds of issues. You send something out, on Twitter or some other social media or whatever. I mean, the response is immediate and it's voluminous. And so people can go to acluohio.org. They can see the action alert that we have up there. You fill in a couple boxes, you hit send, it goes right to the committee. Very easy, very efficient. But last legislative session, I mean, I know from talking to legislative staff, legislators were inundated with people very mad about how they were trying to scrap issue 2 then. We hope that the same thing is happening right now, that they're really hearing about this. And while the Senate seems intent on passing this, it does still need to get through the House. Now, all signals are they want to move pretty quickly on this as well. I mean, if for no other reason, the sponsor of the bill is the cousin of the new House Speaker. So, there's obviously some relationships there that are beneficial to all of them. But, if and when they do pass this in the Senate quickly, and again, it's looking like it's on a real fast track here, we still will have another bite of it in the House, unless, that is with the caveat, it is also budget season in Ohio. That is, they're working on the next state budget. They have to pass something by the end of June. It could also be possible that they wrap this into the state budget bill and we don't hear about it in the House.
Right.
How exactly they might proceed that way, or if they do, remains to be seen. But as of right now, we'd like to think we're going to have another crack at this in the House.
I think so. The question though, Gary, though, is how motivated and active do the potheads really get?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are they too stoned to really get out there and march and be heard? Or do they bring a lot of Cheetos, Doritos, and Monster Energy drinks when they're protesting? I don't know how that works.
Well, it goes beyond sort of, the stereotypical pothead or what have you. There's also a big medical component of this here in Ohio, and people who have, as you said yourself, have seen some pain alleviated as a result of it. So I think there's a bunch of sort of pockets of people who come at this from different directions, but I think all of them are frankly very active. A legislator getting contacted about almost any bill is not the most common occurrence, and you have people that are sort of like, well, hold on, let me know if we get more than 5 or 10 calls or emails or whatever on this. And again, what we were hearing from legislative staff last session was, I mean, they were just getting hundreds and hundreds of calls about this. And it's only one example. I mean, I post sort of sporadically on Twitter and Blue Sky and in other places with rants and thoughts and opinions. And I did one right after issue 2 passed, and they started trying to tinker with it right away. I did a couple tweets that were circulated. They had each of them had over 100,000 views, and so mine is usually anywhere from 0 to maybe 100 if I'm lucky or what have you. And this was 100,000. It was going around the state. It was coming back to me. People were saying, "Hey, did you see this?" I was like, "Look who wrote it." It's like so it was being circulated, and people were taking action. We always make sure when we do something like that, we don't just rant about stuff. We say, and here's also how to take action. So it's very important, I think, though, if people are interested in this and making their voice heard at least a little bit, that they are out there making a lot of noise and being impatient right now. If we're going to go down, we should go down swinging. The book is not closed on this, and even if SB 56 does ultimately pass, I think we're building some real useful relationships and coalition building across different interests, and good, bad, somewhere in the middle with SB 56. However it ends up, it won't be the last stab at this particular issue. This won't be the end of it. There's going to be, I think, plenty more to come in the months, the years ahead on this particular issue in Ohio, as long as we continue to treat this as something to be shunned, stigmatized, swept under the rug, just discouraged. I think the one thing that keeps it going is, as you mentioned, tax revenue. Politicians love tax revenue. They love to spend money, and that's the one thing I think that keeps them from abolishing it altogether.
if you've got an opinion on this, and I'm pretty sure, as Gary said, everybody has some opinion on this, contact your state senator, your state legislator, or go to acluohio.org and let your opinion, your voice be heard, because you've already said what you think about issue 2 and legalized marijuana, and now state legislators want to have that changed. acluohio.org or your state legislator, and let your opinion be heard. Gary, I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Scott.
And I'd love to hear everybody's opinion as well. You can chime in on X. Find me at Scott Sands Media. I'm on Facebook, The Scott Sands Show. You can comment right here on YouTube and all the platforms. And we'll be back with a new episode soon. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.